I'll start then.
Yes.
Yeah. Uh, a very, very hearty welcome to one and all present here. We have people from across the globe representing different nationalities, different minority groups, people who have suffered enormously as a result of their identity as minorities. We have been targeted just because we are people who are not a majority, who are not in the larger sections of the society in terms of numbers. So we people live in countries where the majoritarian, so-called majoritarian communities dominate over us. So in that sense, after the Second World War, we have seen fragmentation of communities, the mushrooming of countries across the globe as a result of the freedom struggles across the world and the colonial countries living their hitherto habitats where they were controlling power and their colonies and have gone back. This has created enormous amounts of confusion across the globe. So this confusion has led to what we have brought the legacies of the World War periods. Because prior to the World War, if you see in Germany, Hitler had mastered the technique of targeting the minorities. But much before that itself, we see in the case of the Kurds, as well as a number of other minority groups who were part of the erstwhile Ottoman Turkish Empire being targeted. So the same legacy continues, wherein the problem now lies in the leaders of the countries coming out with the concept wherein we find that the majoritarian communities are made to feel that they are minorities. So they are putting forward a narrative wherein the leaders, the political leaders of the majoritarian community say that in the next 10 years, we would become a minority if the minorities are allowed to grow. Economically, the minorities are much powerful than us. Where are we heading to? So the best way for our countries to develop is to target the minorities. They should toe the line of the majority. They don't have any rights. They should be dictated. They should be following what we say is the discourse going around in what we call as the civilized world of this day. And today, first of all, let me wish you all a very, very happy Pongal, Bihu, and then across South Asia, we celebrate the festival of harvest today. It's a very joyous occasion. But at around the same time, we find that for nearly 60 days, our brothers from the Sikh community in Punjab, brothers from Haryana, from Rajasthan, from Uttar Pradesh in India are suffering enormously in the biting cold conditions on the streets of Delhi, wherein they have not been heard by any of the governmental authorities, including the Prime Minister of India, who has been deaf to listen to the woes of the farmers. So their struggle continues. Let us hope that there is some kind of respite for them. We have one of the speakers, Professor Jagmohan, who I think may touch upon these issues. That apart, we today happens to be the 100th day of the incarceration of Father Stan Lourdeswamy, popularly called as Father Stan Swami, a Jesuit priest who has been working among the minority Adivasis, as we call in India. Adivasis are the tribal people. The most forgotten people in India are the tribal people who are in complete darkness. So for the past 3 decades, Father Stan Swami had been working with this microscopic minority of people known as the indigenous people of India in one of the most backward states of India, that is the Jharkhand state. So today happens to be the 100th day of his illegal incarceration, incarcerating an 83-year-old Jesuit priest just because he was supporting the struggles of these Adivasis for equality, development, and was the voice of the prisoners of this community. Likewise, across the globe, we find problems with the Kurdish community, with the Catalonians, with the Amazonians, with the Elam Tamils. So across the globe, we find problems with the Aborigines in North and South America, the Aborigines of Australia, who are the minorities. So it is indeed a privilege to have the UN special rapporteur with us, Dr. Fernandi Wernes, who is one of the speakers, and I want to warmly welcome him. And then though his name appears the topmost in the list, I would like him to listen to the speakers and respond to them to make this interaction much more meaningful. I hope he agrees to this suggestion of mine. Then we have speakers from India, a couple of them. Then we have Baba Ilyasi, a good friend, speaking from Kurdistan. Then we have Father Joseph Chandrakantan from the University of Toronto, and Reverend Father Gerard Jumbin, again a priest from southern Cameroon, that is Ambazonian. So we have a plethora of speakers. So today, as we are discussing the minority issues, I don't want the women to be left out and made to be felt as minorities. So it is here that I want to invite my good friend, Madam Patal Kanya Jamatia, who heads the Tripura People's Front. So Tripura is a small state in the northeastern parts of India. So here, once they joined India in the year 1947, after the instrument of accession was signed. So they were about 85% of the population when they joined India. But sadly today, they have been reduced to less than 20% of the population because of the population transfer schemes of the government of India, where these indigenous people are converted into a minority in their own land, which they have inhabited for thousands of years. So Patal Kanya Jamatia is championing the cause of the right to equality of the Tripuri people, and I had a chance to interact with these people and be there on the International Human Rights Day on the 10th of December 1919, a couple of months before the setting of the pandemic. She's a very, very inspired person, a leader, mass leader. I have seen her working with people. It's my privilege to welcome my sister Patal Kanya Jamatia and request her to speak. And then I have already reminded the speakers, you have 7 minutes to complete your presentations because we always have a constraint for time. So kindly keep up to the time limits or I have to intervene. So kindly don't allow me to intervene and cut short whatever you have to state. So confine yourselves to just 7 minutes. And the first speaker, who I presume is not a minority here, because I want to give her the privilege of addressing us first. So over to Ms. Patal Kanya Jamatia. Thank you. You can go ahead, sister.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible. You are audible. You can go ahead.
Good evening all. I'm Ms. Patal Kanya Jamatia from Northeast India. My homeland state name is Tripura. Tripura was an independent state. The treaty with British India was made and marched with India on 13 August 1947. And the treaty was known as Instrument of Accession. According to this treaty, the government of India has committed to give all kinds of protection to the native people, including their fundamental rights. When Tripura marched into Indian Union, The population of the native people, the Borok nation, consisted of 93% of the total population of the Tripura state. Unfortunately, India forces the Tripura royal family to sign a second treaty on 15 October 1949. The agreement was further intentionally made weak and relaxed in the name of Merger Agreement 1949. Since then, India has intervened and encroached in all the rights of the indigenous people of Tripura. Millions of illegal Hindu immigrants have started to enter into Tripura from East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. The government of India, in spite of knowing the fact, have remained silent and had been encouraging the illegal influx for region not known to us. Even after the formation of Bangladesh in 1971, the India government have been allowing to enter Tripura continuously at faster pace, due to which after 70 years, the indigenous people have become a minority in their own ancestral homeland. To this sadly, the native people are below 20% and our 20% and our democratic or our administrative and our economic and snatched away. Now, presently, we the indigenous people have become so helpless that indigenous people are scared to fight for their fundamental rights. The unofficially population of Tripura is above 50 lakhs, and the Aboriginal people of Tripura in only 8 lakhs. Millions intruders who have illegally entered into Tripura are given democratic rights and political rights by the government of India. Not only as a refugee, but millions are entering illegally till today, and the India government has put a notice board at the Indo-Bangla border welcoming the illegal immigrants and trying to wipe us out of our ancestral homeland. Today, as the majority of the population are Hindu Bangladeshis, they have snatched away all our political rights, administrative rights, and our socio-economic rights. Now, out of the total 60 assembly seats, 40 seats are for the illegal intruders, and only 20 seats are reserved for the indigenous people by name of ST category. As India is a democratic country, we are ruled by the illegal immigrants from East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, leaving one and only Mr. Dashrath Dev, indigenous people. For the past 70 years, illegal intruders are either elected or selected as Chief Minister of Tripura. Even the present Chief Minister of Tripura is a non-indigenous people and outsider. Thus, after the majority Bangladeshis intruders have occupied 40 seats in the 60-seat Tripura Assembly, leaving only 20 seats reserved for the indigenous people. The TT-ADC election was supposed to be held immediately after November 2020, but the state have intentionally withheld the election in the 28-seated council. The India government has not taken any action, and the state government has retained all the political power vested to TT-ADC. After taking complete political power in the whole of the Tripura, the daily intruders, outsider in Paralis continue to carry out bloodshed. There have been a number of major riots between the indigenous people and the illegal immigrants in 1980, 2020, and many minor riots. Numerous indigenous people have been killed, but no official record are maintained. There have been uncountable rape of indigenous women and girls, but there is no any single justice till today. Not only that, in 2018, the student organization have protested against the CAA bill 2016. The police have directly opened fire to the peaceful protester, but there is no any justice till today. Just recently, Biswajit Devarma, a fire service personnel while returning from duty on 21st November 2020, was brutally beaten up to death by illegal immigrants. Now the police administration is harassing the democratic agitator in the form of police affairs sent individually in their name of seeking justice for brutally murdered late Biswajit Debarma, and the criminal is still unarrested, enjoying the political immunity till today. I have personally attended the 39, 40, 41 and 42nd session Human Rights Council at Geneva and highlighted the grievous condition of the indigenous people of Tripura and requested the world community to seriously look into the matter. But till now, no any initiative has been taken. So I would once again request the world community to take up the matter with the India government and compel the India government to solve our problem by implementing the NRC and detect, delete, deport all illegal immigrants and also to identify all refugees and give them the status of refugees. This is the crux of our problem, and unless this issue of refugee and illegal immigrants are solved in Tripura, our problem will remain unsolved. Thank you all again.
Thank you very much, sister, for your wonderful disposition and keeping up to the time limit and then putting across the problems of your people as a community leader. You have expressed how even victims of rape have not been able to get justice from the ruling governments in India. So it's really a very, very sad state of affairs. And then we have all seen that personally as to how your people have been undergoing this trauma and suffering. So let us hope that things are turning towards a better future for you and your people. So the next speaker I want to invite is Mr. Baba Ilyasi, who represents the Kurdish people and has also been to the UN Human Rights Commission Council in Geneva very many times. He is a regular person and he has been voicing the opinion of the Kurds who have been parted into four countries: Turkey, Iran, as well as Iraq and Syria. Their struggle is almost 100 years without any solution to this. I happened to be there attending the first Yazidi genocide conference at Erbil. I had a chance to go around and see how the Kurds have been unjustly targeted, though they are a people, one of the largest countries, if it had to be independent, but still treated as a minority group by these four countries, wherein they feel at ease even in dropping chemical weapons on the Kurds, which is unacceptable. And this problem has been going on for nearly a century. So now I invite my dear brother Baba Ilyasi, who has been a great champion of the rights of the Kurds, to speak up on behalf of his people. Baba, it's the time is yours now. Thank you. 7 minutes. You're not audible. Can you just increase your volume?
No, it's okay.
It's very feeble. You have to increase your volume, Baba.
It is the maximum.
Oh no.
Okay. So give the floor to another speaker. I will change my.
We cannot hear you. You have to increase your volume on your computer.
Okay,
Yeah.
he will change his stuff so other speaker can start
other
the join
people.
after.
Yeah, if that is the case, if Father Joseph Chandrakantan is ready, may I request Father Joseph Chandrakanthan to go ahead and then present the case of the Elam Tamils. Father Joseph Chandrakanthan is a professor at the University of Toronto. Apart from that, he has been a great champion of the rights of the Elam Tamils. He is from a priest from Jaffna. And then, as all of us know, the Tamils underwent a genocide unaccepted by the UN and the others in the island nation of Sri Lanka, where even to this day, 146,679 Tamils are missing. This is apart the more than 100,000 people who died during the course of the civil war. Though the Tamils are a majority in the north and the east of Sri Lanka, they are regarded as a minority in they are regarded as a minority in the island of Sri Lanka. Historically speaking, they were the people who ruled their land from time immemorial till the arrival of the colonial powers in 1505. But still, the demographic setup was not changed until 1834, when the British united the whole of the island to amalgamate the whole island under one administrative structure. But when they left in the year 1948, they handed over power into the hands of the Sinhalese, who were numerically more than the Tamils. So since then, the problem started. It's a 72-year-old problem which has not seen the light of the day in terms of offering a political solution to the Tamils. The Tamils have witnessed a series of genocides, as well as a structural genocide continues there unabated in the island. Last week, again, the war memorial of the victims was demolished in the University of Jaffna. So rather than me becoming a speaker, I would prefer Father Joseph Chandrakanthan to speak about this issue. Father, you can go ahead, and thank you for your presence.
Good morning for some people, it's good afternoon, and others, I think it's
late good evening for us.
Evening, yeah. So,
yeah.
The Tamil issue is very complicated one. However, I would like to highlight a few important aspects of it. First of all, I don't personally like the word minority, because that's kind of a label which is based on numerical head count, which has very little to do with proper democracies. In countries where democratic principles or democratic governments are not existing, then minority has one definition. In countries where people, multicultural, multi-ethnic groups exist, minority has a completely different reference. In other words, in the international political vocabulary, you hardly ever come across a uniform definition of the word minority. For example, India is a multi-ethnic, multilingual democracy. But people from, for example, the Tamils are hardly, I think, 7% of the total population. The Keralites are about 3%, or the Punjabis are about 3.5%, 4%. That doesn't mean that they are referred to as minorities in India on the basis of their language. In the same way, in Canada, for example, we don't refer to the French-speaking people who are less than 20%, 22% of the population as French minority of minorities. They are called the Francophone, the French-speaking Canadians. And the rest are called English-speaking Canadians. Here, minority actually means smaller groups like people who have for example, the LGBTQ community is called a minority community. In the same way, people who choose to have a kind of ideology which may not be reflected fully in the larger political picture, they will be called minorities, because they have to fight for their rights. In regard to Sri Lanka, the indigenous people, as many archaeological and other records would reveal, including Mahavamsa, the origin story of the Sinhalese would reveal, but the uncritical analysis of that Mahavamsa has led us to believe that the Sinhalese are the natives of Sri Lanka, which is wrong. Mahavamsa itself accepts that Vijaya and 700 others were sent on a ship on a boat by Vijaya's father, because he was notorious. His behavior was unacceptable, immoral, and so on. That's the reason that they were put on the sea and then banished from the country. This is the story that this is recorded in the Mahavamsa. And some people who take Mahavamsa as a historical record, including K.M. De Silva, the Sinhala historian, says Mahavamsa gives accurate history, even though it's a mythical thing. In the sense, the children are born by relationship of a woman with a lion, for example. This is not. This cannot be. It's an origin myth. It should not be taken as history. However, in that it says that Vijaya came in. He first married an indigenous woman, Kuveni, and then later he chases her out and then goes back to Bengal and brings more women. In other words, the policy of conquerors always had been to reduce the number of the indigenous people. In every country where the indigenous people are there, until today, you would find the oldest people as happened in the people of the northern part of India in the tribal region, as Dr. Paul Newman said, they're always reduced to a minority by policies. It happened in Canada also, even as late as the 18th and 19th century, for example. When they came in, Canada and the United States, indigenous people were deliberately decimated. They were murdered. The two policies existed: annihilation or assimilation. You annihilate the population. There's even today now, even today there are research being done about, for instance, hundreds of blankets were brought, which were used by the people who were dying of plagues in Europe and given to Native Canadians and Native Americans in order for them to use them. And then they died of diseases which they have never had because they were people living with nature and they had no immunity to certain diseases. So there were various policies, but these policies are not used in the 18th and 17th or 18th century. This has been there from the time of Moses or even earlier. And this is the same thing that happened also to the Tamils in Sri Lanka. They were the natives, but they were reduced in number. This is the first thing. Now, after democratic, with the Western invasions of different countries and Western conquest of different countries, including Sri Lanka, various policies were brought in and various kinds of ruling systems were there. And three of them are the ones that are prominent today. First of all, there are laws enacted which would prevent the so-called discrimination of minorities. This is, in many countries, this has been a whitewash. It has not worked out properly. The second aspect is to bring some particular laws or special laws, as we have in Canada, for special laws for the Native Canadians. In Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the Sami people, they have special laws, but we still know that they are very seriously discriminated. And the third system, as we have in Switzerland, is a kind of establishing a federal system. In Sri Lanka, none of the three is there, and none of them ever worked as well. The federal cry was there in order to protect the rights of the minorities. This started already in the middle of the last century. When the first constitution was written and given in 1940s, 47, 48, which is called as the Salisbury Constitution, there it was clearly in section 29, which has a number of details. I don't want to read them. There's not enough time for me to do it. However, specific references were made without the usage of the word minority. You don't find the word minority. It uses the word religious groups or religious communities and the larger other communities, namely Tamils and Muslims. They're named there. In order that they may not be discriminated against, and in order that they may have equal rights, that they may have the right to veto things which might directly affect them, that particular section of the Constitution was brought in. The clause for the protection of the other existing national entities. That's how it is marked there. They are nationalities, not minorities. Now, majoritarian concept is not a numerical concept in democracy. When democratic elections take place, majority becomes a political concept. People who support a particular political ideology, they vote for that ideology, not for religion, not for their caste. And that is not democracy at all. For example, in Canada, if tomorrow, if Mr. Trudeau, who is a Catholic, and 60% of the people here are Catholics, if he were to say that, I'm a Catholic and I want all Catholic votes, he will be removed, dethroned. He will not be prime minister anymore. There'll be a tremendous protest against it. Whereas in Sri
Father,
Lanka,
excuse me, I think you are running short of time. Can you just wind
I'll
up?
finish it in a minute. And therefore,
Yeah.
in Sri Lanka, the majority-minority concepts were brought in only to discriminate against the people, the Tamils, in terms of numbers. It has nothing to do with political democracy. Thanks.
Thank you very much for exposing the problem in Sri Lanka as a problem that has got nothing to do with minority and majority communities. So we welcome your observations, and then we also hope that very soon the Tamil issue would be taken to a logical conclusion by the UNHRC. Next, I want to invite Father Gerard, who happens to be a professor as well as a person who has championed the cause of the rights of the Ambazonians, popularly called as the Southern Cameroonians. I had the opportunity to attend their conference a couple of years ago at Berlin. Very passionate people who are undergoing a very, very sad genocide, which is unknown to the world. We do not know where Amazonia is. That is the state of affairs. So, in that sense, it is people like us who have to give them a voice and then a space to speak up for what is happening at Amazonia, which is known as Southern Cameroon. So, to speak more on that, I now invite Father Gerard Zumbin, who is a professor of moral theology and a priest from Southern Cameroon, popularly called as Amazonia. Over to you, Father Gerard.
Dr. Paul, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I greet everybody who is listening to me. As you already said, and I thank you people very much for giving us this opportunity to voice out the worries and the troubles that are in our land. The case of the Southern Cameroons. I know the topics about minorities under military occupation. And just like Father also said, it will be difficult to really categorize completely our problem as a minority problem, because this is a territory that was given independence, but that independence was stolen. A West African proverb says that he who does not know where the rain began to beat him cannot say where he dried his body. So the reign of military occupation that beat the Southern Cameroons began 60 years ago, from the day its independence was stolen, that is 1st October 1961, through the 1972 dismantling of the two-state federation of equal partners, to Paul Biya's, the president of the Republic of Cameroon's outright declaration of war on the peace-loving peoples of the Southern Cameroons on the 30th of November 2017. This sinister declaration that will culminate into a vicious genocide will be the first in our parts of the world since the Biafran Civil War to render a defenseless Southern Cameroon people of the world's endangered peoples today. The Southern Cameroons never had an army from the 1960s. Throughout the mandate and trusteeship periods before 1961, some Nigerian policemen were deployed mainly in the capital of the Ambazonian Boya, the Southern Cameroons. Generally, each community in the Southern Cameroons had its local police. That time, they were still under the British colonial rule. The only time the people of the Southern Cameroon saw armed soldiers was when the United Kingdom government deployed a battalion of the British Army to ensure security during the plebiscite of February 1961. The British Army built and was housed in 3 camps, one in Boya, one in Mamfe, and a third in Bamenda. The British Army was withdrawn from the Southern Cameroons immediately after the plebiscite. First, so when following the de facto political association with French Cameroon on the 1st October 1961, the oppressive government of French Cameroon took 3 measures within the first week of October 1961. First, French Cameroon moved armed troops into the southern Cameroons and were housed in the very emergency camps British troops had built and vacated. These were experienced by the southern Cameroonians up till today as a foreign army of occupation. They spoke and still speak only French, meaning they cannot communicate with the people. They rough handle and mistreat the people on the slightest pretext, and they are armed and ever present and take pride in intimidating the people. They assume an air of superiority and conduct themselves as an out and out army of occupation. Dear friends, we are talking about 50 years experience of a defenseless people in the hands of military barbarians. Secondly, the repressive Yaoundé government decreed a state of emergency over the whole of the southern Cameroons. The state of emergency was for an indefinite period since it was renewable and infinitum every 6 months. I mean, since 1961, the state of emergency decree introduced detention camps called Les Centres d'Internement and Administratif. These were detention camps for those declared to be dangerous to public security. They were not different from Hitler's Gestapo camps. Thirdly, 6 months later, in March 1962, Yaoundé, I mean the capital of the Republic of Cameroon, decreed a subversion ordinance, which criminalized a wide range of ill-defined conduct and shielded the regime and its members from any form of criticism whatsoever. French Cameroon's system and practice of torture was introduced in the southern Cameroons. Torture facilities known as BMM centers, Brigade Mixed Mobile Centre, were established in Victoria, Kumba, Mamfe, and Bamenda. The favorite torture techniques were the balançoire and the courant, a stand sort of device for suspending victims after they have been tied up like animals. They are made to swing on this device as they are subjected to merciless beating. Often too, the passage of electrical current through body of the victim, the points of application being the armpits, the genitalia, and the eyelids. It was in November 2017 that armed conflict broke out between the Southern Cameroons and French Cameroon when they later declared war on the former and poured thousands and thousands of troops and war material into the Southern Cameroons. The occupation has tightened, entailing more and more widespread killing and destruction and occasioning hundreds of thousands of refugees. Thinking of an appropriate metaphor to describe the brutal, unbearing nature of military occupation of French Cameroon over the southern Cameroon Amazonia, I could only think of the metaphor of a wasp, an African wasp called Kamfamfaai, a notorious predator of the insect family. Wasp, we learn in an African storytelling time, greet unsuspecting prey with an agonizing, paralyzing sting, then lay eggs on their body, which then proceed to eat the victim alive. The occupying military forces of Paul Biya, the President of the Republic of Cameroon, have transformed themselves into the personification of this Kimfamfaai, this wasp. Our poor innocent people are daily eaten alive, to say the least, by Cameroon Republic's military forces. Humanitarian crisis. After 4 years, contrary to the underestimated figures given by international humanitarian institutions and organizations, the real situation of the humanitarian crisis is progressively deteriorating with about 15,000 deaths, 5,000 detainees, 400 burnt villages, 500,000 refugees scattered in various countries, especially Nigeria, 2 million internally displaced persons, 800,000 children deprived of the right to education. In 4 years, the bloody confrontations that have broken out in the southern Cameroons have shocked the inconscience of the international community, though they have refused to become part of the resolution of this problem, thus facilitating the despot and oppressor to do his mime and go scot-free. The silence is deafening, especially from international bodies and media. The affected people must not be scared by the enormity of the task, by the immorality of the present. I call on the international human rights bodies, the African Union and the United Nations Organization to play fair. After all, the problem at its roots is the failure of the United Kingdom and the United Nations organization to grant full independence to a nation that was supposed to be one. But the subjection of our people into mental and psychological servitude has been most dangerous to even physical military occupation. The moral illness about this occupation is that it's a weakening of faith in a moral international institution like the United Nations that has let down our people and that has not only passed unnoticed the wounded man in the biblical Good Samaritan parable, but that seems to enable and encourage the oppressions of our people. History will not judge them kindly, I fear. Because
Father, can I request you to wind up?
Okay. So
Yeah.
we have discovered painfully that no one can speak for us. And so our people are ready for anything to gain their independence. Only those who daily live through the humiliations, the third-class citizens of the world, in the slaughterhouse of bondage, only we can fully figure out and see the sides of these inconsistencies in a world experiencing such speedy and puzzling changes. You cannot suppress the truth. That is a clear fact. Colonialism is a crime against humanity, an international evil, and an evil which has been condemned by all nations of the world, including the United Nations Organization. And when the colonizing powers turns out to be your own brother, it is even more disgraceful. The Southern Cameroon is a territory with well-defined boundaries, and its independence was hijacked or stolen in 1961. As long as the occupying forces of the Republic of Cameroon continue to do what they know is wrong, my people will continue to struggle. As God is always on the side of the truth, I have no doubt whatsoever that the Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia would achieve its goal of a full and total independence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father, for exposing the nefarious connections between the colonial powers and victimizing the people of southern Cameroon, the Ambazonians. Now, without wasting time, I would invite Professor Baban Ilyasi, who is the representative of the Zagros Center and the Kurdish people's rights. He had a technical issue, and then hope it is all right now. Baban, can we listen to you?
Yes, I talk. If it is okay.
Yeah, your voice is okay, but your picture has gone to the left, so that's no problem. We can hear you. No. You're upside down completely.
Is it okay?
No. You're on the left side. No, yeah. If you can turn the camera on to the other side. No. Yes. Now you are okay. Yeah. Yes. Perfect. Professor Baban Ilyasi now. Yes, a handsome man, though he is aging.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Sorry, the audience. Excuse me, the audience. I think we are seeing the upside down now. So,
Mr. Paul Newman, I think you see it upside down. But Mr. Baban, can you go to the same position as you have? Yes.
yeah, it's good now.
Correct.
It's good now. Yes.
Yes. Excellent.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, as Mr. Dr. Paul indicated, the Kurds are living in at least 4 countries: Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And the Kurds make up the 4th largest population in the Middle East. And estimates is talking about at least 40 million Kurds. And the struggle for our freedom goes back to at least 1 century. So after First World War, the Kurds were given, were promised to have a kind of independent state. But some years later, in 1923, another treaty came up, and the rights of the Kurds were lost. So since at least 1 century, the Kurds are struggling to having their freedom. The Kurds in Iraqi Kurdistan since 1990 have gained a kind of, at the beginning, a kind of autonomy, and then in 2003, there is a kind of federal system in Iraq, and the Kurds are enjoying more rights in Iraqi Kurdistan. But still, there are problems, and the central government in Baghdad is trying to retake these rights that Kurds have taken, and it is in Iraqi constitution. But the situation is not still secure for the Kurds, because whenever the government in center in Baghdad is much more powerful, is pressuring the Kurds to give more concessions. As the Kurds in Iran, the situation is so difficult because since the revolution in 1979, the Kurds have been the targets of the oppression by the governments in Iran. And in the same time, there is a struggle, and there is the identity awareness among the Kurds. But we know the Kurds that our struggle is the only way for us to obtain our rights. So thousands of civilians and Peshmerga, Kurdish militants, have been killed in Iranian Kurdistan because we are just fighting to have the basic rights for our people. But for that, at this stage, there is no hope that the central government will change its behavior and accept some kind of civic or cultural right for the Kurds. However, in the Iranian constitutions, there are some articles talking about the minorities in Iran to exercise their right to their language and to their culture. But these articles never been implemented since the revolution in 1979. The Kurds in Syria, it is maybe you are aware of the situation over there. There is since 2011, the Kurds have come up with a kind of resistance to radical Islamic groups, and also they are more present in the political sphere in Syria. So we hope that at the end, the Kurds in Syria will force the central government in Damascus to accept in the constitution a kind of cultural, political, and civic rights for the Kurds over there. The situation in Turkey, it is much more complicated. Since 1923 or 30, at the beginning, the Kurds were denied their existence in Turkey, and still this repression continues. Tens and hundreds of Kurdish militants and activists, among them political leaders like Salahuddin Demirtas or Abdullah Öcalan, are in Turkish prisons. So the situation in Iran and Syria and in Turkey, sorry, are less promising than in Iraqi Kurdistan and Syria. In that two parts, in Iraqi Kurdistan and Syria, now the Kurds have a kind of autonomy and or federalism. This is yes, the situation is that in that parts in Kurdistan. I don't know if I have time to go into details because the number of persons have been, for example, in 2020, at least 150 Kurdish porteurs. These people are carrying goods from one part of Iranian Kurdistan to Iraqi Kurdistan in the frontiers have been killed and many others have been wounded. So this, however, the Kurds in Iran, they are about 15% of the population in Iran. More than half of the person disappeared, executed, or are from Kurdish origin. So the situation.
Can you just wind up?
Yes.
Time.
Yeah. So one thing we the Kurds have learned that the only way to resist is to continue our struggle, is to bring awareness into our population, because more we are aware of our rights, more we can resist to these repressions in these countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Babban, for your wonderful disposition and also bringing out the problems faced by the Kurds for the more than 100 years in not just one country, but then divided into 4 countries. That's quite unimaginable for an ordinary person to understand your struggles and how you have continued the struggle for seeking a separate country for yours, which rightfully belongs to you. So the next speaker is Professor Jagmohan Singh, who is the editor of the World Sikh News. So as a person who knows him quite well, I would like to say that he has been a great supporter of all the people in India who have been suffering from the atrocities committed by the majoritarian communities in not only India but throughout South Asia. He's a great friend of the Tamils, a person who has traveled to the to the state of Tamil Nadu, and then who has been a friend in the time of crisis, supporting the Tamils. He is also a person who has traveled to Tripura and supported the people of Tripura in their struggle. So that apart, he is again a person who has stood by the people who were part of the Citizenship Amendment Act, people fighting against the Citizenship Amendment Act, which primarily targeted the minorities in India. He led a big campaign in New Delhi, especially in the Shaheen Bagh Morcha protests in New Delhi, and presently he is also involved with the farmers protest, as I mentioned in the beginning, at New Delhi. A man who is a great public speaker, a person who stands for the rights of all the oppressed people, not only in India but across the globe. A person who's a true champion of human rights, a good friend. Over to Professor Jagmohan Singh. Welcome to you, sir.
Mr. Jagmohan Singh, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'll mute myself.
Greetings from Punjab to all distinguished representatives of various nationalities. Thank you to Tamil movement for giving me this opportunity. And indeed, it is a very important opportunity because the people of Punjab, Kashmir, and Northeast have been waiting for a very long time to meet any person who is a UN special rapporteur on their home ground. Because since the last many decades, India has not allowed UN special rapporteurs to come to Punjab and Kashmir officially. So I'm really grateful that I am meeting online Dr. Fernan, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Minority Rights. The topic is minorities under military occupation. A speaker before me very rightly pointed out the connotation of the word minority differing in various countries and how that term is used, especially in countries of South Asia, by majoritarian regimes to suppress minorities. At the outset, I would like to say that today, as we speak, even though there are elected governments, Kashmir, Nagaland, and Tripura are three areas which are under military occupation and paramilitary occupation today in India. Not to talk of the occupation of Elam by the Sri Lankan government. These three areas are clearly being suppressed legally, administratively, politically, and the human rights of the populations of these areas and the right to self-determination of the three areas except Tripura, two areas except Tripura, even after official recognition by the United Nations, is being suppressed. I hope and I always pray that the UN becomes more proactive in this sphere. As regards Punjab, you are all aware, and today is the 50th day for nearly 100,000 farmers, of which around 80,000 or so are from the state of Punjab, camping on the periphery of Delhi in icy cold temperatures, men, women, and children, and nearly 75 of them have so far lost their lives due to the weather conditions, and some who could not withstand the pressures exerted by their banks and have committed suicide. This, of course, is in addition to the large number of suicides which have been happening in Punjab over the last decade and more. Punjab also has been at the receiving end of the Indian state castigating the rights of the people, the aspirations of the people as a law and order problem. International opprobrium has been few and far between. We are grateful that the assistant of the UN Secretary General has made an observation regarding the right to peaceful assembly with respect to the agitating farmers. But I personally are waiting for the UN Secretary General to himself make a statement. I'm always agitated by the fact that countries like India and even the United Nations, which advocate peaceful struggles, do not react till violence happens. With 100,000 people and a government which is not listening and a judiciary which is subverting the justice to the farmers, it is now time for the United Nations to intervene strongly and immediately. We are grateful to the Prime Minister of Canada, the members of Parliament, congressmen and senators from New Zealand to Australia to countries of Europe, USA, and England who have expressed solidarity. But we are waiting to listen to the United Nations. India is a huge country. The market potential is very high. International bodies and governments are overawed by the larger than life image of India. We do not have a continuous review of the UN treaties and conventions which India has ratified but not implemented. Torture is rampant. Sedition is levied on 83-year-old Father Stan Swami at the drop of a hat for talking about the rights and working for the rights of the Aboriginal peoples. The right of indigenous peoples which are being trampled in Tripura are not even being viewed as indigenous rights because India calls them Adivasis and refuses to accept the international definition of calling these people indigenous peoples. So while we narrate the problems of farmers, the Sikhs who are languishing in prisons, even after completing their jail terms, and those who are being held without trial or protracted trial for years. I would request the UN Special Rapporteur on Minorities, sir, that we need more such meetings. We want the UN offices to train the minorities and other regional identities, the Dalits, women, and others, into the procedural systems of the UN so that we are able to make specific petitions to you which can be heard and whereby India can be made accountable for the violations. We would like that the UN documentation of procedures be translated into various languages of this country. And I'm sure that all the participating groups would be more than willing to undertake this job in association with the various UN offices and departments concerned, so that we are able to teach and train not only human rights defenders, but also children, preparing them for the next generation. In India, anybody who talks about human rights is looked down upon by the political system, by the biased media, as well as by the judiciary. There are laws which are on the statute book, which were framed by the British when they were occupying India. And if I were to enlarge the scope of the word occupation, then the Sikhs were an independent people when the rule of Maharaja Ranjit Singh was annexed in 1849 by the British. In almost a smash and grab policy and execution like India did with Sikkim in 1975. And then when the partition of the subcontinent was happening, we missed the bus. There is a whole history behind it, but without going into that, we were an independent people. We have a separate religion, a separate culture, a separate identity. And therefore, in conclusion, I would say that our right to life, our right to our language, our culture, and our destiny is under threat. Sometimes this threat is visible, but most of the time it is sinister and not visible. We urge the UN Special Rapporteur on Minorities, and through him to all other UN Special Rapporteurs, that please enable us to fight for our rights. And I express my full solidarity with everybody and every nationality who is present in this forum. And I would like to convey my Male Vanakam and Mika Nandri to my Tamil brethren all across the globe. Thank you very much.
I would respond to Jagmohan Saab by saying Mika Nandri, because today happens to be the new year for the Tamils across the globe. The world celebrates New Year on January 1st. The Tamils celebrated on the January 14th. So it's here that your signs of solidarity with the other suffering people go a long way, and this is the need of the hour. Thank you, Jagmohan Saab, for your wonderful disposition, not only on the problems faced by the Sikhs, but also the minorities across India, Pakistan, and other places, because let us not forget that nationalities such as the Baluts and people across Afghanistan are also suffering a lot as a result of the state policies across the globe. So to finally respond to all our inputs as well as our speakers, we have the man of the day, Dr. Fernando Vernes, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on minority issues. And I am sure, as a person with concern, as a person who has responded to the calls of the different humanities across the globe. As you were rightly pointed out, if not for the UN, who else is there to whom we can approach is the question. So here we have Dr. Fernand, who as a great human being, apart from being a UN independent expert and a special rapporteur, will respond to whatever apprehensions and whatever submissions we have humbly made before him. Over to Dr. Fernand. Thank you for being with us, sir, and then listening to the speeches here. Though we are all constrained for time, you have enough time to respond to all our aspersions and queries, as well as wish to Pungal Nalvalthukal. That is the wishes for the new year from the Tamil side of India and Neelam. Warm welcome, as well as over to you, Dr. Fernand.
Thank you, Dr. Newman. Ladies and gentlemen, bonjour. First of all,
a mystery. Come detective hot on the trail.
Sorry, you can continue now.
We have removed that person. You can continue now. Sorry. Mr. Fernandez. Boscona?
Yeah.
I think Fernandez has left, isn't it? Can you call him, ask him to rejoin?
Yeah.
I think that user who came in,
probably he blocked him or something like that.
Something happened to his line. Because that was a suspicious user. We are extremely sorry, audience. Something happened. Is he responding?
Yeah. He said he was kicked. He have been kicked out. So I think we
ask him to rejoin, because somebody is in the name Zoom users, and he has been kicked out. He basically was trying to distract.
Yeah, he said Zoom is not allowing me in, so
we had to go out, everybody, and had to come back because you are rejected.
No, wait. I can.
Close it and restart it.
Can we do that? Can everybody hear us?
No, yeah. I think it's better to wait, because I just asked him if he can connect with another device.
Right.
Because
yeah, it may be the device specific issue.
This idiot. Sorry, excuse my language.
Because that's why I put him in the waiting hall, because the best way is to put people first on the. Yeah, he's there.
Oh, he's in. He's in. Dr. Paul Newman apologized him on behalf of everybody.
You can talk to him and.
Yeah, no, but still I can't see him.
The Warren.
Dr. Fanan, can you hear us?
Yeah, he's in.
Dr. Fanan?
You should unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Apologies. That was interesting.
No,
it seems I was
apologize.
kicked out.
Some technical issue, I think, and then you had to go out. And then, your camera seems to upside down. Vimal, is it okay?
No. He's okay.
Oh,
He's
it's fine
okay.
for us. It's fine for us.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
If that's the case, I think go ahead.
Now, I have to say, it seems like I was kicked out of from Zoom, which is very interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Newman. To start again, ladies and gentlemen.
The are conspiring against us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's fine.
So,
thank you.
Once again, apologies for that. I seem to have been kicked out of Zoom, so perhaps there's something to verify as to what happened. So I'm delighted and I'm honored to be invited to address the this online seminar of the Tamil movement on minorities and military occupation. And I want to thank, of course, all of you also who have shared your knowledge and information on, at times, the horrendous situation of minorities in your countries. Unfortunately, it's not always appreciated, even at the United Nations. It's not always appreciated the extent minorities are targeted with brutality and denial of their human rights. But before I begin, I hope you'll allow me to react to what I was very, very surprised, I have to admit, to hear that French Canadians are not considered as minorities. Now, I do have to respond because I take it for granted you do not know I am a French Canadian. And so I should know. There are no negative connotations in Canada. French Canadians are, in fact, also minorities. Even the Constitution of Canada, the highest legal document of the country, talks about in Article 20, Section 23, that citizens of Canada whose first language learned and still understood is that of the English or French linguistic minority population. So let me emphasize, it's important to understand that minority is more of a demographic concept. There is no negative connotation, and you should be aware that some governments actually try to deny that minorities exist, because if they recognize that there are minorities, they recognize that these population groups have certain human rights. Indeed, to respond to the honorable speaker from Punjab, I have on a number also, I should respond to the honorable representative from Punjab. I actually also have made attempts or requests since 2018 to be permitted to conduct a mission in India, and I'm still waiting for an official response. Let me emphasize that democracies are not immune to intolerance, racism, and discrimination towards those who are different because of their ethnicity, religion, or language. And those who are outnumbered, minorities, tend to be most vulnerable and not treated equally. The concept of equality is different from the concept of minority. But it is true that minorities tend to be treated unequally. We can see this with the treatment of people of African descent and Latinos in the United States. We see that with French Canadians, French-speaking Canadians and immigrants in Canada, and we see it with Muslims in many European countries and so on. Because minorities tend to be marginalized in most societies, including democracies, there is a special focus on the importance of recognizing and protecting specifically their human rights in international law. That's why we have specific provisions in some treaties that talk about the human rights of minorities. So my presentation, however, will focus on two other main points. Dealing first with the vulnerability or marginalization of minorities more generally in situations of conflict or military presence. Minorities still have human rights in those contexts, and are entitled to the full protection of international law, and particularly to the prohibition of discrimination. It's interesting to note that just a few years ago in 2017, there was the first ever joint research effort by the United Nations and the World Bank in a study called Pathways for Peace, Inclusive Approaches to Preventing Violent Conflict, that points out that today's main drivers of instability and conflict, and therefore of military measures, if you will, are group-based grievances around exclusion and discrimination. Now, let me emphasize this. This report, the first of its kind by the World Bank and the United Nations, make it clear that exclusion enforced by state repression increases the risk of violent conflict and therefore of military responses, and that countries where governments violate the human rights are at higher risk of violent conflict. And what all of this means is that there's a context where this occurs. And the context which the World Bank and the United Nations study points out is situations where countries experience violence because of their treatment of the grievances of minorities. That's, in the end, the real message there, one of the main message of this report in relation to preventing conflict. Most, if not all, but almost most of the world's conflict are intrastate, conflicts inside a country. And to make the point absolutely clear, they involve minorities. In other words, most of the situations of military measures within a country, because most of the world's conflicts involve some minorities who may be perceived by a state's military not necessarily as citizens, but as a potential threat or enemy, or at least sympathizers with hostile forces. And this creates difficult conditions on the ground and may mean that specific minorities may be treated in a hostile way. And this can have extremely serious consequences. And we've heard this earlier during the seminar. Very serious consequences in terms of the treatment of the populations, and let's call them for what they are, usually minorities, their treatment and access to public services of all kinds without discrimination. And just this week, for example, we've had reports of Palestinians in Israel and occupied territories being refused access to COVID-19 vaccines or even public health services. It was reported in the Guardian newspaper last Sunday that Israel is, on the one hand, celebrating an impressive record-setting vaccination drive. And it has already apparently given initial vaccines to more than 10% of its population. But in the West Bank, the vaccines are only distributed to Jewish settlers and not to the roughly almost 3 million Palestinians living around them who may have to wait for weeks or perhaps months at this point. Now, there are, of course, many complexities, but the main point with this example is that Israel, as an occupying power, must fulfill its obligations under international law and make vaccines available to the protected population as a whole and without discrimination. I emphasize the word discrimination. In the case of most countries, or most minorities in most countries in the world, they are not exactly in the same position as Palestinians in occupied territories because, well, most of them would be citizens. But the legal principle is the same. They must be treated without discrimination by public authorities, and this includes the military when we talk about international law. However, prevention is always the best solution. What we need to address should be prevention. Since conflicts are the main drivers of most of the world's humanitarian and other crises, once again, in the case of most, or if not all, situations of military occupation, a more proactive and preventive approach to these conflicts is needed. because simply reacting after the fait accompli, after what occurred in countries such as Yemen, Myanmar, and South Sudan, which has led to millions, mainly minorities, suffering massive atrocities and brutality, is too little, too late. And frankly, it doesn't seem that the international community is currently able to handle the surge in humanitarian and atrocity situations we are experiencing. And yet, there are, as I speak, potentially new crisis points building that may simply overwhelm our capacity to respond to the human tragedies that are likely to unfold. Now, it might be useful to give you two examples. As some of you have heard, and in fact, we've heard already to some extent, more than 3/4 of the world's stateless people, men, women, and children who have no citizenship, are persons belonging to minorities, mainly, for example, the Rohingya in Myanmar. The Rohingya are about 1 million. They represent some 10% of the recognized stateless population. Well, that kind of situation is occurring also in Assam state in India, where a process is underway which may result in around 2 million, perhaps more, new stateless people. Most of them are members of Bengali or Muslim minority. Another conflict, and I want to refer to the participant, the distinguished speaker from Cameroon. The situation in Cameroon also is one which concerns me gravely, and I have publicly come out, by the way, at the United Nations in New York, referring to this situation. And in my opinion, what we're dealing with is the grave mistreatment of a minority that involves the English-speaking population in Cameroon. We've had a bit of the historical context previously. I would point out to you that there are long-standing grievances in relation to the treatment of this population, this minority in that country, over the use, for example, not the only point, but an important dimension, over grievances over the use of their language, which has led to, for a number of years now, violence, a growing secession movement because of the, first of all, the grievances that are connected to discrimination in employment, in education, in the legal system also, and which has led to grievances that are unanswered or sometimes answered with violence, even aggressivity or atrocities, and that we now have hundreds that have been killed, and including targeting of, in some cases, as you know, targeting of teachers, schools, and students. Now, I just wanted to explain the basis for the perhaps surprising interest and focus of UN institutions. At the United Nations, there has been some discussion about the situation, but it has not actually been very often a situation that has recognized that there is a group, a population, who happen to be a minority and who feel, and we've heard this before, feel that they have been treated unfairly in a discriminatory way by a government that tends to favor the French-speaking population or the institutions that seem to represent more the French-speaking regions of that country. To be blunt, under my mandate, I would consider that to be a minority issue and an extremely important one, because you have populations which are associated with the English language and the English-speaking cultural sphere that are disadvantaged. They are excluded. In other words, that are discriminated on the basis of human rights. In other words, their human rights in the area of language and institutions and culture are actually not respected or dealt with in a discriminatory way. This is the reality also in many of the other conflicts around the world. Most conflicts today, around 60 to 70% of the world's conflict involve minorities. Minorities who are in many cases vulnerable to policies, practices, and laws that discriminate and exclude them. And the basis for grievances that can lead, well, We're seeing it in many countries that can lead to frustration, resentment, and eventually violence. And let me be perfectly blunt. As a special rapporteur, I am an independent expert. There is a timidity and even a reluctance to acknowledge this and at the United Nations, so that when referring recently
shut the fuck up, you fuck
to the situation in
nigga.
The United Nations Secretary in a public press release mentioned the English-speaking population, people and group, and even that there was a French-speaking minority, but unfortunately never admitted that there was a minority. Prevention is absolutely necessary to stop minorities becoming under military control as a threat or an enemy. Without suggesting any solution, of course, there are steps that can be taken to address some of the challenges of preventing conflicts and of preventing situations of military occupation. And the obvious one would be to say that the international community needs to focus more on improving efforts at preventing conflict. Again, the World Bank UN report admits that a shift away from managing and responding to crisis and towards preventing conflict can save lives and greatly reduce costs, including the human and financial burdens of dealing with millions more refugees or IDPs, most of whom, once again, will be minorities. And perhaps surprisingly, at least for some, this report by the World Bank and the United Nations admits that economic development itself is not in itself a solution. If some groups, marginalized groups, minorities, still feel excluded or not equally benefiting from that country's relative prosperity. And what is missing, oddly, is the frank admission that to prevent conflicts and contribute to peace, to avoid radicalization and violence, to avoid situations of repression, of subjugation or domination of minorities, and to have, in other words, an inclusive and open society overall, you need to address the underlying grievances that can lead to most of the world's conflicts. I would like to close by pointing out that we actually, as part of my mandate, we are organizing this year a series of regional forums, regional opportunities to consider the prevention of conflict and the protection of the human rights of minorities. And in a way, this ties in with the topic of this situation, to avoid situations of military measures or occupation by avoiding conflicts and protecting the human rights of minorities. So this year, under my mandate, 4 regional forums dealing with these dimensions will be organized in the 4 regions of the world. And indeed, at the end of this year in Geneva, this year's United Nations Forum on Minority Issues to be held at the United Nations in Geneva in November will be on the same topic. And in a way, this is a response to the invitation of the distinguished speaker before me. He mentioned that there was no opportunity for a special rapporteur to go to India. And as you know, the expression, if the mountain doesn't go to Mahomet, Mahomet will go to the mountain. In this case, we will be trying to have regional forums closer to different parts of the world to deal with this important dimension to prevent conflict and address, in a way, if you will, the discrimination that is too often inherent in many societies, including democracies, and to how to address, to avoid the situations of discriminatory or the situations that violate the human rights of minorities, including in military contexts. And on that, I will end my presentation, and perhaps we have time for some discussion. Obviously, you have heard we've had some problems. I've been hearing some very nasty comments on the audio, so there are some people trying to disrupt this online meeting. Thank you.
Yes,
One,
some people have been really nasty in terms of expressing their opinion, which I feel is undemocratic, and then which I feel is unwanted, because here we have all decided that we need to come to the open forum to have an open-minded discussion. So we may have our own grievances, we may have our own problems, but then that doesn't mean that we use unparliamentary languages. So extremely apologetic to that, and then really appreciate you for your continuing with your discourse despite these hindrances. And it's also a welcome sign when you say that the UN is trying to reach out to the people, though the countries are not reaching out to them. And you have mentioned that in 4 regional areas, there would be the minority issues that would be taken up. And I would be interested in knowing where exactly it would be happening in South Asia, so that the people across South Asia would be able to prepare themselves and then participate on a grander scale. So I now throw open the floor to a few questions. So if you have any questions, I would request the participants to raise your hands and then pose your questions to the Honorable Special Rapporteur. So the floor is open for questions. Kindly raise your hands and you can have one question each.
I think there is we're going on.
Yeah, there are a few participants has raised their hand. I would kindly request everybody to mention your questions are directed to whom, and we have speakers from various countries, including Southern Cameroon is Mr. Father Gerard, and Ms. Patel Kenya report, and Mr. Jack Mohan Singh, and Professor Dr. Chandrakantan, and our chief guest, Dr. Well.
Fernand. First, I would request Father Konandeswamy is here. He has raised his hand, and then I would go ahead with the Father Konandeswamy. Father, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. This is a general question, just maybe it's a question, but it is a clarification. Maybe the special rapporteurs can answer, or maybe other speakers also can answer. The very defining the word minority, it is ambiguous, the term. It is not very clear whether it's a religious minority or linguistic minority, or it is a geographical minority. How do we define, maybe as a UNO, how as you worked in a various places, as you assign and think and write a lot of writings, how do you define this minority? In what sense you try to define this minority, and then you say that it is a vulnerable? For example, in India, minority rules. The Brahminic community is a minority, but they are ruling the entire country. In the Sri Lanka, a minority rules the entire country. So how do we say that this minority is suppressed, or minority is what do you call it, vandalized or something like that? But can you tell me the minority, or define the minority? Thank you.
I would ask the participants to be very, very precise and short when you're posing your questions. Now, can I ask the special rapporteur to respond?
Special rapporteur has.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, the issue of what is a minority has been problematic, or perhaps even controversial, for some time at the United Nations. However, I would point out to you that in 2 reports, the first one in 2019 and the second one in 2020, last year, I presented 2 reports to the United Nations General Assembly, clarifying the word minority itself, then clarifying the 4 categories of minorities which we recognize at the United Nations. And this has to be clarified. there are, in fact, 4 categories of minorities which fall under my mandate and are referred to in UN documents and treaties. They are national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. To summarize and make very simple what it can be a little bit complex, we are talking about within the entire population of a country. So on the geographic basis, it's the whole country. That is the unit that we are considering. One has to consider whether a population group is more or less half the population of the whole country on the basis of nationality, ethnicity, religion, or language. You can have a group which might be religiously a majority, but might have a number of different, for example, languages. In the case of India, you have, in fact, a Hindu majority. My understanding is that the Hindi language is the largest, but also a majority language in the country. So to respond directly to your question, we have to look at what is the determining, what is the issue? Is it an issue involved of language, ethnicity, religion in some cases? And is the group alleging violations of their human rights, are they less than half the population of the whole country in terms of their language? That's the relevant issue, or ethnicity, and so on. So once again, it has just come out. The most recent report, the one that clarifies the 4 categories of minorities, religious, language, ethnicity, or nationality, has just been released at the General Assembly of the United Nations last October, a few months ago. And what will be happening is that we'll be publishing, if you will, a more concise note that clarifies these concepts. And if I may, just very quickly emphasize, it has nothing to do with status in the sense of being inferior in any way. Or it has nothing to do whether or not you're treated equally. It is an objective determination, and it is not premised on any kind of official recognition of the state, of the government, and that's an important dimension also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your clarification, sir. I move to the next question. It's by Julius Inde. I presume I have pronounced the second name correct. Mr. Julius Inde.
Yes.
Yeah, kindly give me. Yeah.
Hello.
Be precise and short, and then address the question to the person.
Can you get me, please? Can you get me?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yes, this is Julius Ndel. I'm calling from Hamburg in Germany. I'm the vice chairperson of the Southern Cameroon community here in Hamburg, Germany. I would directly follow. I have a question to the UN reporter about his reactions to the minority question, which has been the subject of the day. And following his response to the various opinions which or presenters, either from the Kurdish or the minorities in India or those from the Southern Cameroon, there is a central question, and which I think he failed to directly express his opinion as a resolute, and which is the question of self-determination. It has, in his address, either he directly or indirectly ignored that the wishes of minority, whether it's those countries that have had independence, like the Kosovo, like the Eritreans, like the East Timor, or like the people of Southern Sudan, they were acting as minority. In his address, he did not adequately look into that, saying what are the people, why are the people expressing, especially with regard to the United Nations issues of unfinished decolonizations, which seems to be at the top of these minorities fighting. What will be his opinion towards a sustainable, peaceful society within the UN and the countries of the world on the question of minority and the right to self-determination? Thank you. That is my question to the reporter.
Yes.
Thank you. I can answer immediately if that's okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your question. I did not address directly the issue of what constitutes a people. And we do have to be careful, or we do have to be accurate in this area. when we refer to the right of self-determination, the right of self-determination actually is reserved, or at least it's referred to in United Nations documents as a right of a people. You will be very aware, for example, that indigenous peoples have a right to self-determination because they are a people. You referred to the situation of East Timor. East Timor is, as you pointed out, a situation of part of the decolonization process. And that it is an extremely important dimension. In other words, when currently in international law and at the United Nations, when they refer to self-determination, you can look at all of the documents of the UN. It is always reserved to groups of populations that are known as peoples. Minorities is a different category. On the one hand, it is not my mandate, it's not part of my mandate to comment on any issue related to peoples. My mandate, and I want to be extremely clear, my mandate is restricted by the United Nations to minorities. Now, having said that, let me add one qualification. There is nothing in international law that says that a group such as an indigenous people cannot also, in some situations, not always, but in some situations, constitute a minority. And there is, and if I can perhaps add a certain qualification or a further element to that, it means that in quite a few situations, even though the two concepts are different, an indigenous people can be a minority without its position as a minority affecting its status as an indigenous people. So in that situation, indigenous peoples can claim to have a right of self-determination as recognized in international law. But you should not, and I have to emphasize this, at the United Nations, there is a distinction made. Minorities are not automatically or necessarily a people or indigenous people in the example I've given. The two can overlap, but they're not identical. And I think we need to be very precise here. Under my mandate and the United Nations treaties and other instruments, there is no connection made between a minority and a right of self-determination. The right of self-determination is limited to peoples, whatever that includes. And therefore, I am constrained to adopt that position also. I hope I'm making my point very clear. We have a special rapporteur. There is another independent expert that deals with indigenous peoples, generally. The other element that I would perhaps just very quickly mention, I mentioned that this year the theme will be the prevention of conflicts and minorities. I want to say that without commenting too much or expressing an opinion, I think in many situations of conflict, minorities should have some form of right of autonomy. That autonomy arrangements has been demonstrated to be an effective way of ensuring inclusion and also ensuring that the discrimination is less prevalent against certain minorities that are concentrated on a territory. So I mentioned that because I think it is important when we talk about situations of conflict, that to know that the rights of minorities may include some form of territorial autonomy in some cases, but we cannot assume that at the United Nations we recognize all minorities as a people with a right of self-determination. That's not the case currently, although there is a recognition at the United Nations that indigenous people have a form of right of self-determination.
Thank you very much for clarification. And then, personally speaking, India is going towards a very, very wrong direction in terms of what we hear as mob lynching of the minority Muslims, and then imposing ban on the eating of beef. And a few of our participants here have sent messages with regard to that I would love you to clarify on these issues before I pass on to Reverend Joseph Chandrakantan, who has the next question. Father Joseph Chandrakantan.
Thank you very much,
Kindly
Mr. Fernand, for the nice presentation. You clarified a lot of issues. But I just want to comment on one thing, namely, when I spoke about the Canadian situation here, the French are not here seen as a political minority. They are part of the founding nations of Canada. The French, the English, and the Indigenous people are the founding nations of the Canadian democracy. When I meant about the political reference to them as a minority, it's not there. Constitutionally, they are a linguistic minority, just as English-speaking people are a linguistic minority in Quebec, for instance. That I don't deny it. But what is important for us in Sri Lanka is the majoritarian concept is seen as a numerical political concept. And therefore, the minority has not even the right to own land in our area. For example, the entire, when they have the whole territory belonging to one state, minority is counted purely in terms of numbers, not in terms of rights. And for that matter, there is no, I mean, I find it very hard to understand there is any uniform definition of a minority in international vocabulary or in legal vocabulary. Do you think so? Is there a uniform definition of minority applicable to all languages, religions, and other groups, which is internationally sanctioned or accepted legal definition?
Thank you. I'll answer that with reference to what I just mentioned earlier. We actually have only recently, admittedly, prepared reports to clarify the concept as it is formulated in United Nations documents. So there is a concept of minorities that has been, has a certain peculiar wording in the United Nations treaties, such as Article 27, to be very precise. There's more than one, but there's Article 27 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And what the two reports that I referred to in 2019 and 2020, the last one in 2020 being only a few months ago, do is to actually provide a global definition, or if you will, defining description of what these treaty provisions refer to. What is a national or ethnic, religious, and linguistic minority? And yes, it is general, but it does actually, it is applicable in all countries, in all parts of the world. It will be this year that this will be published, perhaps more precisely and accessibly at the United Nations. As I said, the last report that kind of finalized this was just prepared a few months ago. But it is considered to be applicable because it does involve clarifying the scope and content of universal treaties such as the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And once again, there's nothing mystical about the concept. It is an objective, a numerical concept based on nationality, ethnicity, religion, or language. And I must say it's absolutely necessary. Many governments tend to want to avoid clarifying the concept of minority because a government will deny that they have any minority in order to avoid having human rights obligations towards minorities who are actually excluded or victims of discrimination. India was referred earlier in relation to the treatment of certain allegations of treatment in relation to the Muslim minorities. Listen, they are minorities. Muslims are actually outnumbered very clearly in the whole country, and legislation, laws, and policies of the government, it would seem, actually discriminates against them. By having a clarification of the concept of minority, we are actually allowing minorities to be protected more clearly and avoiding governments trying to cast aside all of their human rights obligations by simply saying, we have no minority. We're not referring about political minorities. That has nothing to do with it. French Canadians are numerical minorities in Canada. And under the international human rights treaties, French Canadians are minorities in relation to the human rights provision for minorities that we have at the UN.
Before proceeding, I would like to know from Dr. Fernand, the special rapporteur, as to how much more time he has with us, because I don't want to prolong, because it's already going to be 2 years since we have held him despite his busy schedule. So that if I have the time, I can schedule the questions accordingly. Dr. Fernand.
I have about 5 minutes, then I'll have to go. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe in short, I would like a lady to pose a question. Ms. Ambihai Selva Kumar, kindly just you take 10 seconds to pose your question and a very short answer before we can give a chance to a couple of others within 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Sri Lanka has gone to, you may be aware we are facing genocide. Do you have your office or do you have plans to go to Sri Lanka? And if not, what do as Tamils we need to do so that you can establish an office there? And what powers do you have if the state doesn't cooperate? Thank you.
Thank you. There are no plans to have a mission in Sri Lanka at this point. We only have a very limited number of missions that we can conduct every year. Only 2, in fact, to be very honest. The issue of genocide or any other situations of violations of human rights can involve many different entities at the United Nations. I'm only one of 53 independent experts at the United Nations. So we have very many different mandates, if you will. What you should consider is that either special procedures or other kinds of other bodies of the United Nations, there are processes, procedures to submit allegations of violations of human rights. So there's it's called the special procedures communication, where you can approach us directly to respond to allegations of violations of the human rights, including of the Tamil minority. To be very honest, since I have arrived as a special rapporteur on minority issues at the UN, I don't think I've received many. I might have received 1 or 2 allegations of violations from the Tamil minority to my specific mandate. So I think what you need to consult is the special procedures site or my webpage site as special rapporteur on minority issues. And there is a section where you can actually send allegations directly of violations of human rights. We are reactive. We don't have time to, we don't investigate every situation. First of all, people actually have to make allegations to us. And if we don't receive allegations, we don't act, to be very honest. And I don't think I'm incorrect by saying, I don't think my mandate has received more than 1 or 2 direct submissions to my mandate from the Tamil minority in Sri Lanka in the last 3-4 years.
Thank you very much for your answer, sir. And it very clearly specifies that the Tamils have not exactly approached you, though they have been crying at different forums. The person whom they have to knock the door at has not been approached, and hope in future the Tamils do their documentation properly and approach your good officers. The next person to ask a very short question is Mr. Chris Ajua. Chris, are you around?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. De Varend, for participating in this great discussion.
Yeah, please come to your question directly.
My question is, why does the United Nations try to define the problems of the people, let us say, for example, in the case of the Southern Cameroons, why do they try to define the problems rather than let the people define their problem by saying, for example, our problem has to do with wrongful decolonization process or incomplete decolonization? And when they mention stuff like UN Resolution 1608, Roman 15, they mention those. And another thing also, why do they always use words like concerned, that they are concerned, and there's no action they do nothing, or they say, for example, the both sides should lay down their arms so that they can, they can be peace. You can't just lay down your arms and there is peace. And the United Nations does not make any effort to separate the two sides that are fighting, and people are dying. There are refugees internally displaced. So those are my questions. I have more, but because of time constraints, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, I think we have to understand, and we have to be honest. The United Nations is first and foremost an organization of states, and the United Nations works within certain diplomatic constraints. To be very honest, so sometimes it is clearly that the United Nations as an entity in general will tend to adopt very diplomatic language and try to see if it is possible to achieve a political solution to very complex problems. The United Nations cannot directly, immediately intervene in situations, internal situations. Let's be honest, I think that has a lot to do with it. Could the United Nations do a lot more? Absolutely. I think we have to be honest about the situation in Cameroon. We have to be honest in the sense that there are legitimate demands which I think have to be met, for example, by recognizing that we are dealing with a community, a group, I would use the word minority, that has legitimate claims in the area of language and also institutions. I've tried to get involved. I think I mentioned it at the beginning, and I have raised this issue, the issue of Cameroon, previously. But the United Nations generally itself is mainly a diplomatic entity that represents first and foremost the interests of the states, and therefore it does restrain, if you will, its freedom of activity. But it doesn't mean that you should stop. You have to continue these activities, and including you should participate in my regional forum for Africa, which will deal with the prevention of ethnic conflict, which should be held around May of this year. There will be public announcements made shortly on these regional forums.
Thank you, Dr. Fanan. Maybe one of the last questions is from Mr. Manivannan. Mani, please be very, very brief. Don't get into any history, just directly your question.
Muted.
No, we can hear you. Mr. Manivannan, you can talk.
Yeah, if Mani can't be heard.
Okay, thank you. Today's topic is about militarization. Very quickly, yeah. I want to ask the rapporteur, what are the protection, as we are a minority of ethnic, religious, as well as the language, and we have been suppressed from a long time. Military occupation is a reality. One in four in our area or military personnel. So, what are the protection available for minorities under your department, and what things you can bring forward for our protection under military occupation?
Yeah, thank you. I can take another 2 questions so that once and for all, Mr. Fanan, Dr. Fanan can answer everything and wind up. And Azad from Kurdistan, can you come across with your question, please? Very short and very brief.
Okay.
Azad, yes. Kindly go ahead and speak.
Azad.
Cannot.
You can
it's okay.
now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Azad Salawati. I am the president of Zakros Human Rights Center. I joined you a little late. I know my colleague, Dr. Baban Eliassi, will explain the situation of the Kurds in the 4 parts of Kurdistan, but What I would like to ask you in is relation to the situation of the Kurds in Afrin in Syria. The city of Afrin was taken on March 18, 2018 by the Turks and its affiliated militia. Above all, the demographic of this region are changing. And the Turkish government forced Kurdish inhabitants to leave the region and install Turkmen and Arabs. What can you? I ask Mr. Varne. What can you do to prevent violence against the Kurds in Afrin? Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
I repeat my question. What can you do to prevent violence against the Kurds in Afrin? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Princess Dora, can you be brief, very, very brief with your question?
Thank you so much. I have a question for the reporter. My question is with respect to the categories into which he has put minority people. When I look at the case of the Southern Cameroons, I find it disturbing in the sense that the Southern Cameroons was an entity. It was a country with clearly demarcated borders, a people within their own territory, with boundaries that are still recognized today. So that is what disturbs me. Like if they say we are a minority, in what context? Because its boundaries are still there that can still be recognized by the United Nations. So that is just what bothers me, because I wonder what is really a minority and what is the difference between minority and that of a state of its own with a territory and its people. That is just why I see Southern Cameroons like they are asking for what they want, self-determination. That is just what disturbs me, Mr. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see Father Gerard has been a person who has been in the panel, and Nisha is one of the organizers, so I don't want to give the floor to them. So I restrict with these three questions, which I hope the special rapporteur would answer, and we would be able to wind up, because we have held him much beyond the time limits which he had prescribed. Over to the special rapporteur.
Yeah. Well, I think, thank you very much for those questions also. They're very important. They're very complex. Obviously, in a couple of minutes, I can't really do justice to them. The first two, however, let me try to answer in this way. What can I do? The short answer is I cannot do very much. However, myself, other colleagues, other special rapporteurs, and other committees of the United Nations, we can be useful tools in order to raise visibility in relation to the violation of your basic human rights, whether it's Afrin, Sri Lanka, or other countries. And I think this is the way it has to be looked at. I cannot pressure, obviously as an independent expert, I cannot force a government to comply with its legal obligations, its international obligations. Neither can even the United Nations Secretary General. However, it can increase pressure. The more often you use and are able to raise the visibility of the situation in Afrin, or the situation in relation to the Kurdish minority or other minorities, including in Sri Lanka, the more pressure you can increase on the government to try to make the government aware that it has the attention of the international community, to increase pressure, perhaps to change some of its policies. And I think you have to be strategic. I don't have the answer. The UN Secretary General, in a sense, doesn't have the answer either. But the more you can use the United Nations mechanism, the more pressure, and if you're strategic about it, maybe you can bring about change. I understand that this will not satisfy situations that are tragic, horrific even, but it is, you have a number of tools, pressure tools, strategic tools that might be, in some cases, raise or improve the situation or have some impact. On the issue of Cameroon and South Cameroon, I don't know the history of Cameroon. Yes, the English-speaking part of Cameroon was separate, and it apparently joined the Cameroon in a voluntary referendum. Whether or not it was truly free and voluntary, I don't know. But the situation is currently that the population of that part of Cameroon is a minority, and it is marginalized, and it is in some cases excluded, and we could argue it is the subject of discrimination by the government. And I would urge you to consider using the mechanisms such as the rights of minorities to try to change that situation in areas that are important. The territory is important. I did refer to the issue of autonomy for minorities. I think that's part of the solution, but beyond that, I can't really comment much more than that.
Thank you very much, sir, for your wonderful disposition of what are the things that you can do as a special rapporteur towards protecting the rights of the minorities across the world. We look forward to more such interactions with you and hope many more nationalities across the globe who are minorities join this forum to have a dialogue, because it is our firm belief in a democracy we need to have dialogues to enhance and further our cause. So you have spent more than enough time with us, and we are extremely grateful to you for your kind deliberations with us and then trying to clarify the doubts we had, though we had to rush up. Though we are all not satisfied with the time we got with you because of the time constraints and because of the given circumstances, we had to confine ourselves to the given opportunity. And then we certainly hope that the pandemic ends soon and we are able to meet you in Geneva, because most of us who are here are people who regularly visit Geneva. And as a person who has been open to meeting people and addressing the concerns of the people, we would certainly meet you in person in Geneva. With that hope, I now hand over the mic to Mr. Vimal for his concluding remarks and ending the session. Thank you, Dr. Fernand, for being so gracious and addressing the issues of the minority communities across the globe. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you very much, Professor.
You can conclude and ask your last question also.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Actually, I don't have a question for Mr. Fernandez, but I just want to give him one small piece of information. The whole Sri Lanka, as a country, they have 19 commanding posts of their forces, including military, air force, everything. Out of this 19 commanding posts, 16 commanding posts are in the midst of Tamils. Can you imagine the occupation of military? And the Tamils has to deal with it every day. And they have, every 4 Tamils, they have 1 military. And this has been happening for the last over 35 years. So that is that's a small piece of information. As you have mentioned that we have not enough contact with your department, and that's a good piece of information that you have provided to us, and we will be actively contacting your department and submitting our evidences and other reports and other violations of our military to your department. Thank you so much. And with that, I would like to thank Dr. Fernandez and Dr. Father Gerard from Southern Cameroon, Professor Sandra Gandhan from Toronto, Canada, University of Toronto, and also Mr. Jack Mohan Singh. And also I would like to thank Ms. Patel Kanya for your participation, and also rest of the audience, including Tamil Movement, who has organized this wonderful, informative online meeting. And also I would like to thank Dr. Paul Newman for moderating this event. And we are looking forward to have more such event in the coming months. And I would also ask all the participants who has participated today with us you have listened to all the professional advices and also the problems, including Southern Cameroon, India, and also Sri Lanka. And I would like to thank again. And since it is took about over 2 hours, and I would like to say until the next meeting, thank you and have a wonderful day for all of us. I would like to greet Happy Thai Pongal. Thank you so much.